Welcome to This Week in Money. I'm Jim Goddard. Today, Black Swan Capital President Jack Crooks is bullish on the U.S. dollar, but not so keen on the loonie. Martyn Element of Element and Associates wades in on the practicality of electric cars and whether Scotland will face economic hardships if they leave the U.K. We talk to Jack Crooks right after this.
More and more people are looking to the internet for intelligent, riveting, and thought-provoking interviews. To advertise on the Goddard Report and TalkDigitalNetwork.com, call 604-699-8600, 604-699-8600. Welcome to This Week in Money, the source for market opinions. Here is Jim Goddard.
My guest is Jack Crooks, president of Black Swan Capital. Today we're going to be focusing on currencies, Jack. And the first question we have, with the strength of the U.S. dollar, does it look like it's going to move even higher?
It does. I think we're really in one of those strong dollar bull markets. The global fundamentals seem to be in place. The Federal Reserve Bank is going to raise interest rates, so the relative yield in the U.S. should continue to move higher. And if currencies move on both growth and yield, and when you look at the relative growth in the U.S. compared to the Eurozone and even Japan, and even, what's happening in Australia, I think the U.S. is starting to win the game on both scores. And if you actually take a measurement of the amount of funds flow back into the U.S., foreign direct investment into the U.S., the game is on, so to speak. I think we could be in one of those really runaway bull markets in the U.S. dollar.
Do you have any price targets for the U.S. dollar right now?
I don't, other than to say that I think we're in a breakout here, and I think these currencies, both on the commodity side and on the European currencies, could go a lot lower relative to the U.S. than we think. I think we could revisit those areas we saw in 2008 when the U.S. dollar was in like a major risk bid. I think we could achieve that and even more if the Fed does come out of this tapering, as they say, and actually makes some type of noise about the interest rates in the near future.
Do you think the policy of just printing more money has solved the economic problems of the U.S.?
Well, I think you're in that's a problem, and it's been a problem, but I do think that's more headline. The reality is there's a lot of countries in the world that with the interest rates or the relative market interest rates going up, dollar funding is becoming more expensive and more scarce. So you're starting to see the demand for dollar funding increase in a way you haven't seen before. So I think there could be a continued rush into the dollar because of that.
What about all these pundits who say the U.S. dollar is on its last legs, and yet before you know it, the only thing that's going to work in the U.S. as currency is maybe gold or silver?
I don't think any of that is true, because if you look at the relative position of the U.S., even since the credit crunch, the dominance of the U.S. in terms of positioning of currencies, central bank positioning has increased. If you look at the relative investment around the world, where's it going? It's going into the U.S. compared to any other country. So I think I don't think any of that makes sense if you really look at the numbers underneath the surface. So I think that's one of those things they try and do to scare people into other asset choices. But I do think the U.S. dollar, if you take away these kind of this hype, about the U.S. being challenged, the Chinese currency is going to take over, that type of thing, which it's not going to do for a very, very long time. And you really focus on the improvement of the U.S. current account deficit, the improvement of just the basic fundamentals in the U.S., really driven a lot by the energy industry production in the U.S. And you look at the dollar flow of international money moving back into the U.S., the idea that the U.S. dollar is in trouble doesn't make any sense to me.
I know a lot of people have decried, the U.S., they say these companies are very profitable, but all the profits are coming from overseas. Does that mean profits finally will be starting to come back home to the U.S.? I mean, having been produced right there?
Well, I think that argument makes some sense. I mean, there's no doubt that the multinationals, a lot of their money comes from overseas. But from a currency investing standpoint, if you look at I think the focus has to be on money flow as opposed to worrying about, near-term corporate profits or where that is generated. And if you look at money flow, it just suggests that given what's going on around the world, the risk in Japan for Abenomics, the risk in the Eurozone of whether or not they're going to be able to get out of their deflation, the risk of Ukraine, Russia, the risk of Scotland and the rising, soaring current account deficit in the UK. And again, the risk in Australia when you look at some of the impact on the mining industry that's starting to really show up because of the relative lower demand for resources. I mean, when you look at the key competitors for the U.S. dollar, you got to think the U.S. dollar is in a pretty good position.
Why is it taking so long for a lot of people to recognize that?
Well, I think in general most people are not responsive to a lot of the underlying fundamentals, and I think a lot of people see what they want to see, so to speak. And there's been so much negative talk, about the U.S. dollar, the big dog being knocked off by China, et cetera, causing the credit crunch and therefore its fundamental weaknesses of the U.S. economy. But again, if you step back and look at money flow and look at the relative importance of the U.S. as the source of demand for the world economy, those fears just don't add up.
Well, with all these people touting the Chinese currency, what about their economic problems that are happening right now?
Yeah, that's true, and I've probably overplayed myself some of the economic problems, in China, saying the real estate market's going to be a disaster, et cetera, and there is a scenario that says we could have a financial crisis in China, but in general, I don't think we're going to see it. I actually think we're going to see some reforms in China, but I do think we're going to see a much lower GDP growth in China going forward. Now, that doesn't mean it's a crisis in China, and I think that we're not going to see a crisis in China. I think the leadership has done a very good job of handling this, but the same token, it doesn't mean that China is going to challenge the U.S. for economic dominance from an asset flow standpoint. I think they're separate issues. But there's no doubt that China is going to continue to try and internationalize its currency. But I really, and I've said this before, I think this is a multi-decade, process, because, if you look at the amount of assets that are owned internationally, U.S. assets that continue to be bought internationally by all around the world, relative to the assets that are owned by China, and the key way to internationalize a currency is open your current account and let countries own your assets. China isn't even close to moving up that chain yet. So I don't think they're going to challenge.
More with Jack Crooks next on This Week in Money.
Always consult your investment professional before making any investment decision. More and more people are looking to the internet for intelligent, riveting, and thought-provoking interviews. To advertise on the Goddard Report and TalkDigitalNetwork.com, call 604-699-8600, 604-699-8600. This Week in Money is archived online at TalkDigitalNetwork.com.
Welcome back to This Week in Money. We're speaking to Black Swan Capital owner and president Jack Crooks. Continuing with the topic of China, they have, they've changed their one-child policy now. They say if you invest at least $200,000 in foreign real estate, we'll let you have a second child. Have they caught on to something there?
Well, I think the leadership in China, is really understands the problems and understands the demographic problem that they have. Whether or not they can solve that with this, I don't know, and I really don't think so. But in terms of how it impacts on the currency, it's one of those, that are out there. One of those major macro concerns. I think more near term, the current leadership has to continue to move down that reform path that they've started, and all this crackdown and corruption is part of that process. These Chinese muckmucks that keep jumping out of windows is part of this reform process. I hate to put it that way. It's kind of blunt, but the reality is that he the current leadership is cleaning up this and knows that they have to in order to make that transition away from, all these princelings and this whole economic model based on the past. And I do think they're going to make that transition. But there's no doubt, 10, 15, maybe 20 years out that the demographic problem is real and could be huge, but I'm not sure from a currency investing standpoint over the next several years it's something that we have to be concerned about.
Is China's gold buying binge, which has been going on now for 5 years, most of it in secret, is that part of their plan to protect their economy if their currency or international currencies collapse?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure if that has anything to do with the currency per se, as opposed to, I think just kind of solidify their own balance sheet, so to speak. Because in terms of gold's relationship from currencies and gold's relationship, from a country's longer term stability, I think is still in question, in a world in which the gold standard no longer applies. So, I think it's still just an open question. I don't have an answer for that, Jim. It's a good question.
If Scotland decides to go independent, is the British pound going to take a pounding? I didn't mean to make a pun.
I think the pundits that have said that, Scotland goes independent, the pound could fall, 10, 15, even 20%, over time, makes some sense because it just changes the dynamic for the UK in general. They're not going to be the relative power that they are. They're probably going to end up pulling out of the EU if Scotland goes independent. It just, it completely changes the whole UK finance and the UK political system, and I do think it's going to be very, very negative for the British pound. In fact, we have a small short position, based on that potentiality playing out.
Would Scotland be able to use the British pound, or would they be correct in saying, no, you've decided to withdraw your services from the UK, so you're going to have to print up your own thing or go to the euro?
I think it'd be better off for Scotland if they created I don't think they'll go to the euro. They may try and use the British pound, but the UK government has kind of told them that they may not be allowed. But I do think Scotland would be better off printing their own currency because I think it would generally be a devalue relative to the pound, and be good for, their export content, which is going to be important for them. So I think their best path would be to go to their own currency and not worry about, creating some type of peg to the pound or using the pound or even, messing with the euro. I definitely think the chances of them using the euro are slim to none because they understand the straitjacket that puts on them. So if they actually get a yes vote, I think the country would be much better off using their own currency.
Most of the major British banks now say if Scotland votes independence, they're going to withdraw their offices there. But on the other hand, they're going to be a country doing business. Would they be, cutting off their nose to spite their face?
I think you nailed it, Jim. I think it's one of those threats that may not prove true in the end because Scotland would be their own, viable country with a lot of business to be done, business to be had. They have oil business. They have a lot of single malt to sell. So I think you're exactly right on that score. I think a lot of this is just window and try and get them to vote no, but I don't think they'll follow through on that if they actually do vote yes.
Yes, and what, we keep hearing, William Wallace, you'll never take away our freedom. Well, the reason Scotland joined Great Britain back in the early 1700s was that Scotland had gone bankrupt trying to populate the Panama Isthmus. So unless they decide to take over Panama again, you think they have a pretty good shot at it?
That's a great point. People don't understand that they were forced to kind of make this union because of their major financial crisis. I do think they have a good shot at doing this. But what's even, I guess the follow on is even more interesting. It will definitely trigger, the desire for separatist movements, really across the world. We have, Catalonia in Spain that will probably, be emboldened if Scotland votes yes. And, we have, of course, Eastern Ukraine, which may be emboldened by this, ironically. And a lot of areas around the world. So it goes way beyond Scotland, but I do agree with you that, Scotland may make a pretty good run of this and I don't think the the same type of financial crisis as anywhere in the offing that created this problem in the first place.
And of course, here in Canada, we have a little place called Quebec that's been making separatist noises since they joined Canada.
You do.
So, and speaking of Canada, are you bullish, bearish on the Canadian dollar, and why?
I'm bearish on the Canadian dollar. We have a major short position in the Canadian dollar, and just because we see these deflationary forces continuing to grow, the relative rise in U.S. dollar with the corresponding fall in gold and oil prices suggests that these deflationary forces are still powerful, and they could continue, and I think they're going to continue in the Eurozone. So, and you're starting to see the impact in Australia. I'm leading up to this to say that the relative demand for commodities, I think, is going to continue to be low, and therefore I think Canada will be impacted. So we are bearish on the Canadian dollar at the moment, and happy to be so for this run.
Jack, maybe you can tell us where people can go right now on the internet to find out more about what your company does and how they might even be able to participate in it.
Sure. It's www.blackswantrading.com, and we have a free daily newsletter that we write, Currency Currents, that you can sign up for. And you can also just ask for, if you just send an email, the information there on our website. We'll be happy to set you up for a free trial of our services. We offer 2 subscription services. One is trading spot foreign currencies, and the other is trading currency options. And of late, we're very happy to be long the U.S. dollar against some of these currencies, and doing quite well of late. We'll see how long that continues, of course, Jim. There's no guarantees here. But we just think the environment, when we started off with your first question, is very, very dollar bullish. And we think this is a time that, it's a time to really make some money on a longer-term trend, being long the dollar against some of these currencies.
After the break, Martyn Element on This Week in Money.
More and more people are looking to the internet for intelligent, riveting, and thought-provoking interviews. To advertise on the Goddard Report and TalkDigitalNetwork.com, call 604-699-8600, 604-699-8600.
This Week in Money is archived online at TalkDigitalNetwork.com.
My guest is Martyn Element of Element & Associates. He's a corporate consultant who focuses on sourcing and pursuing new business ventures. Welcome to This Week in Money, Martyn.
Welcome. It's been a few weeks, and I've been busy flying all over the place and doing things, but I'm excited to be back talking with you again, Jim, and the listeners.
Wow, we have a lot of stuff to talk about today. Potential silver producer in Mexico, the GoPro camera, how are Apple shares doing after the introduction of their new products, the Tesla electric car, a rescue plan perhaps for a mining prospect in Ecuador. And we'll also talk a little bit about will Scotland say goodbye, you bonny lads, we're going on our own. Miss Moneypenny, get my hat for me. Well, Martyn, first of all, what's happening with this potential silver producer in Mexico?
Well, you know what? I just for the listener's sake, I've told it was a silver prospect. It doesn't surprise me with it being Mexican, but it could obviously have a gold component as well, particularly the Zanico Eagle, because I think they're more of a gold-featured company. But it's not so much whether it's gold or silver. It's the dollars involved, and the significance is, from our perspective in the business, is that it's an exploratory company. It's not got a resource on it that's got a 43-101, and people can look at it and say, well, it's worth this much, so we should bid this much. It's getting very good results. And an Eco-Eagle obviously has spent a lot of money going through those results, and it's obviously been on the ground, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But they're paying just over $200 million equivalent using their shares to pick up this company. Caden is the name of the company, and what makes it very newsworthy is what I've just said, that it's not, well, it's got so many million ounces blocked off, and that's why we're paying this and doing that. It is an exploratory company, which we haven't heard any sort of real action on exploring or exploratory companies for a long time in this marketplace, particularly being bought out. So it's just, I hope I'm not drunk with hopefulness here, but it is an encouraging, small, but it is an encouraging sign in a market that is, I'm telling you, we haven't put that on the heading here today, but this last week particularly, everybody's thinking the fall, September, end of August, beginning of September, that things will maybe get back to some semblance of order and things might get a little better in the marketplace. Nope. Veterans that have been in the business longer than me, I'm not saying something, listeners, but longer than me, are saying that this is absolutely the worst market ever in their lifetimes and in my lifetime. In our particular section, I know we're going to talk about some global influence companies, but I'm thinking here, Vancouver is the center, or hopefully still is the center of the world for junior mining and exploration for junior mining. And it is, newsflash, but it's not a newsflash. It is as bad as it's ever been in anybody's lifetime. So there's still no real signs of any improvement. And you've had things like potentials of, World War III has even been mentioned on a few people's lips over the last few weeks. And you've had that Ukraine horrible situation. And anyway, so let's not divest too far here, but it's just encouraging to see somebody stepping in with some decent money, not $2 billion but $200 million isn't chump change, and an Eco-Eagle doesn't make a lot of mistakes trading away there at $39 a share this morning, wherever it is. So it was just interesting. I thought that was worth a mention, given where we live and where the show's being, originally broadcast from.
The GoPro camera, that cute little thing that people are strapping onto their skateboard helmets or right on the skateboard, it came out of nowhere now. How well is it doing, Martin?
Well, it was, the IPO, I think, was around 30, and it hasn't looked back. Currently traded up to $71 this morning, currently around $68, $69, giving it a $4 billion cap. A lovely fellow, lovely youngish guy. I saw him on 60 Minutes the other day, and how refreshing is that to see a young, fresh, doesn't look like he's some, left field sort of odd spot. Not that there's anything wrong with people that are left field odd spots, but just a genuine, all husky guy and a surfer, I think, is what I remember. And, he produced this camera that he wanted and for himself, for his own use and everything else. And then he started to, but anyway, what a great American, USA, or in Canada for that matter. What a great story that it still works, that if you've got a great idea and you get some friends, he probably used his friends and relatives, I think he mentioned, to get the thing started. And here he is now, embracing his success with these, cameras which are being used in anything from skateboards, surfing to racing cars, motorbikes, and we're the benefactors. Remember, I still, even now, when I put my television on, I was watching the England-Swiss game the other afternoon in a friend's office down in Dallas, and he had he had a 70-inch, I've never seen I don't think I've ever sat that close in a boardroom and the quality of the picture, I felt like a spoiled brat. I don't take that HD quality TV for granted, and I'm glad I don't. But now you've got this camera that can sit on the front of anything, on a bird, a swan, a motorbike, or a skier, and you're getting that HD quality right in, and this is it, 214, and we as consumers are getting spoiled, and it's only going to get better in those particular areas, and it's exciting as all hell to be here and experience it. But there you go, go camera, and I wish we'd all loaded up with the stock when the IPO came out, but we didn't, but it's looking fantastic.
Huge rollout recently here for the new Apple products, the iPhone 6, the expanded iPhone 6, and coming out just a few weeks after they're available to the public, they'll have the first iWatch. People were expecting a huge run on Apple shares when these new products were introduced, but did that happen, Martin?
Well, it's been we'll pass over this one quite quickly because I think the interesting part of it is that it's been a non-event stock performance-wise, but that's what pent up, for these deals when the world knows they were working on a few things. And of course, the stock has done extremely well over the last 12 months. Don't take that away from it. But here we are with the actual product. And I don't think it's, unless I'm going to be proven wrong in the next little while here, at the moment it's not flying off the shelves. The one I like more than ever of that launch is, I've never carried one of these. I see these friends of mine with these great big bulky wallets and they put them in the pocket and they look like they've got a medical problem, or they put them in the wallet in their suit pocket and it looks like they're carrying a gun or something. But I'm a guy who sticks I'm a silly man in some ways, I guess. I have one of those thin, leather little fold. I have my driving license. I try and only carry one or maximum two credit cards, and that's it. So I'm a lean, mean guy. But to be able to have the whole thing in my hand, in my phone, I think is even better to a great degree. You know, as it is, I enjoy going with my credit card and tapping it on the terminals when I'm buying something of a lesser price or whatever, and that's a nice experience. You're not messing around with keying codes and everything. So I think the one thing that will do very well, although I think it's got competition already, is your iPhone becoming your wallet for real, and your, you know, that I think will do well. But the bigger tablet makes sense, because I think that's been brought about with the Galaxy and and these other Samsung products, which I'm seeing more and more of, because I don't travel as much as I did, but I'm still traveling quite a bit, and you see more and more evidence of these bigger screened, phones. And I think that, and the watch, well, that's old hat too. I think a young man right here in Vancouver came up with that one about a year ago. He's a son of a friend of mine, and he did it on a crowdfunding, and, you know, he went out to raise, you know, a couple of $100,000. I think he cut it off into the millions. I don't know what the actual millions of dollars. He invented one of those phones where you can get your email, and you can get this and you can get that on your wrist. And so I looked at, I couldn't believe the photographs of the watch. To me, I thought it might be a wrong or a joke or a prank, that the watch itself it wasn't futuristic, and it was nothing like some of the prototypes that Apple's been showing us with the clear watch with just a lot of things coming up digitally within the face, like in a plastic watch with a digital type. Nothing like that. It's some old looking, clunky, ugly looking thing from what I've seen, and I think that's not doing them any favors. But you know what? You've got to think that as much as these things take on a life of their own, there was a fellow who was obviously a genius beyond geniuses, and he's no longer with us, and I think it's beginning to show in the fabric of Apple products. You know who I'm talking about.
Steve Jobs.
Stephen, yeah. I think it's starting to show.
Well,
so there
also
you go. A story about a non-story, Apple.
Well, I was also going to say, too, with Apple products, they say, oh, we've just invented it, and they're rolling it out. I know how electronics work. A lot of their stuff, look, they have products that are already developed that they plan to roll out slowly over the next 5 years.
Yeah.
So they're going to make the watch look ugly right now, and then they'll slowly improve it.
Oh, you might be right there, Jim. That's an interesting. I hadn't
Apple
thought of it
fans
that way.
will line up around the block for hours, sometimes days, just to get the very latest product. And the company knows that. I mean, the people are addicted to these things. So, yeah, they'll make the watch look ugly right now, and it won't be as functional as it could be. But very slowly, they'll make it prettier, make it more of a fashion accessory. But one of the questions they're asking in British Columbia right now is, we have what we say the one-touch law over distracted driving, which, by the way, in British Columbia now, it kills more people than drunk driving.
I know, it's horrible. Driving. It should be more enforced, and it won't be until the deaths get up there, and then they'll come down on heavy. And I mean,
but they're wondering...
that's the way life is, unfortunately.
But they're wondering, if you're wearing one of these Apple watches or a watch like it, does that mean that you have a distracting electrical device right there? Messages.
Oh, it's going to... I absolutely... I hadn't thought of that one, Jim. That's another recipe for disaster.
Or what if it vibrates when you have a message?
Well, what will happen is, of course, we're only a touch away, and it's already done. I'm going to sound antiquated to some of the listeners that are very, very technically advanced, and that's no longer a problem, Jim. If your watch tells you got a message come in, you'll just touch the face of your watch, and it'll give you the message digitally through your system in the car. It'll just tell you, "Hello, Martin, I'm calling you about going for dinner tomorrow night in Texas," or whatever, and blah blah blah, and you'll even be able to answer it and say, "Yes, I can come. Please, I'll see you 11 o'clock, Tuesday morning," or something. And so the watch thing is temporarily, you're right, Jim, but longer term or shorter longer term, the technology's already with us, so that's not going to be a long... Short term, though, you're right. It'll kill a lot of people, Jim. Kill a lot of people. Anyway, what was the next thing?
It was the Tesla electric cars. Well, people now think of it as a technical device, not as a mode of transportation.
Yeah, it got my attention, that. I love that. Someone said, it's no longer being thought of as an automobile. It's being thought of as a technical device. I thought, well, you know what? There's an argument there. And this fellow was the reason he was remarking about it was, he said that he was having trouble with his. A lot of people have seen the inside of a Tesla, and it's got like a 10-inch square screen in it, a computer screen, touch screen in it. Talking about touch screens, and it wasn't working. It was malfunctioning, and of course it's the key to it's the soul of the car, because everything goes through that, everything, and being electronic, the car itself, and it wasn't working. And what he said was, how wonderful was that? He says, I went to bed, and in the morning I came out to the car, he said, and it was working fine. They'd fixed it overnight remotely, just the same way that when you've got your telephone, you've got your TV box and your phone Sure Up or Telus, and you want to get it fixed, they do it from the central control. So welcome to getting your car fixed if it's a Tesla. I'm sure you can't. Unfortunately, you won't get that out if it's the axles or the tires or some of the more mundane things. But if it's the engine, so to speak, they can fix it remotely, which I thought was welcome to that one too. And I was with a friend of mine who was one of the first buyers of a Leaf in America the other day, and
which is an electric
he's been a big
car.
believer, and he says, Martin, he says, I know he's in the business as a broker, and he went to the expense about 3 years ago of writing a 100-page report with a lot of people involved in the writing of that, from a research report, all about lithium and all about the electric cars and the batteries. And his consensus was about 2.5, 3 years ago, nope, not touching it yet. It's ahead of itself. They haven't got it right with the cars. They haven't got this right. They haven't got that right. But lately he's been saying they're getting it right, Martin, and obviously he's been, I would think, I don't know, but I think he's been involved in the Tesla from a broker point of view. But he's saying, you wait, when Tesla gives us the compact car, when Tesla gives us the mid-size or even the compact car, it won't be like what the mid-size and compact electric cars that we've got so far. It'll be obviously along the lines of that beautiful looking vehicle, the Tesla sports car. And my friend's wife is lucky enough to own one, and he says, Martin, he drives a beautiful, very fast car, and he says, Martin, he says, mine won't touch it, and yours won't either. He said, Martin, these Teslas, there's no gear shift on it. You just put a pedal and off you go. He said, so you get a small compact or whatever that'll out accelerate a lot of these expensive cars. That'll perform like a sports car like you've never driven before. It'll look wonderful. It'll be priced right. And here's the thing that Jim and I were talking about off air before we did the show. And instead of being at that gas pump with a nice fast performing compact or little sports car or whatever, it's costing you maximum $30 a month or $20 a month instead of $300 or $400 a month. Hello. It's so, and we're getting very close to that. And I think that's going to be something that, even though we all know it, we all talk about it, it's still going to be an absolute revolution. And that's going to be a mine. And of course, the other thing that's in the same article written at the same time is the Google car. Now, there's a company that's really pushing it. And the same fellow who's so pro electric car, he doesn't think, for what it's worth, he thinks it's another 10 years on the Google car. And by the Google car, not the Google car, but the Google car that doesn't need a driver. He thinks that's still a ways away. But he's not, he's not Einstein either, but I think he's probably out by a few years. But I do respect his opinion, because he's doing a lot of really, really good things with technical underwritings and devices and things. So I do respect him a lot. So yeah, the Tesla's at it again, and I think that story is just so wonderful. He got repaired from them overnight, and it's fixed. Anyway, there you go, Jim.
More with Martyn Element next on This Week in Money.
More and more people are looking to the internet for intelligent, riveting, and thought-provoking interviews. To advertise on the Goddard Report and TalkDigitalNetwork.com, call 604-699-8600, 604-699-8600.
This Week in Money is archived online at TalkDigitalNetwork.com.
Welcome back to This Week in Money. I'm Jim Goddard. We're speaking with Martyn Element of Element and Associates in Vancouver. The Globe and Mail had this story, and of course some of these people personally. The Lundin Group, who have the Kinross mine, are trying to develop a property in Ecuador, but when you go to that part of the world, politics plays a bigger role than anything. What's happening there?
Well, Kinross has the property. It was a stock, and I remember it because I was on business with a well-known business fellow in Greece at the time, and he's done extremely well, and he was buying positions, huge, massive dollar positions on this Orion with an A, and it was a massive, at the time, discovery in Ecuador. And, the telephone numbers as far as ounces, I think it was 17 million ounces. It was just a huge bloody deposit of gold and very high grade. And the stock ran from basically nothing to 40, I think it peaked at 43. And eventually, when all the furor and the dust died down, Kinross came in and they paid equivalent of $8.50 a share for it, which was equivalent, into the billions of dollars. I think it was a couple of billion dollars, or billion and a half, or $2 billion. Anyway, it was a lot of money. And I'm sorry my number's not spot on, but you'll get the drift when I continue on the conversation. And that was about 4 years ago. And since then, because the Ecuadorian government is so, they're based, unfortunately, a lot of the beliefs of these leftist governments are very anti-mining, whether it's right, wrong, or indifferent. They don't want to touch it because it's such a hot potato, and rather than get on with it, they just don't like mining, and they're anti-mining in Ecuador in many respects. So Kinross has been unable to do anything with it. So it's an asset on the books that's completely non-performing. So and I'm repeating what was written in the Globe here, is that Lucas, the Lundin Group, is looking at buying that resource from Kinross at a tremendous discount. And the numbers that were quoted were sort of anywhere from 100 to 300 million. And the Lundin Group is going to obviously try their hand in trying to unlock that value that Kinross decided to put their hands up for. And what I was saying is that, I had the pleasure of knowing Adolf quite well, and I actually interviewed him on a show with many years ago with Rafe Mayer, and it was a wonderful interview with him. And what Adolf's forte is apart from being a great visionary and being able to see, favorite poem was If, by the way, which I love, but Rudyard Kipling's If, but he was able to see opportunities, but he would go in where angels fear to tread. He would go into countries that people just said, absolutely, I would not go there for all the tea in China, like the Sudan, and some of these treacherous areas in the world. And he, through his skills, personal, and having people around, and obviously with the same fortitude and attitude, he was able to negotiate the most amazing deals and make himself an extremely wealthy man. I believe probably into the billions. And he was very early, of course, into Russia with Gazprom and all kinds of things, and did tremendous deals, before a lot of things became to be in the Russia, and the lifting of the curtain and everything else. So around the same time it was all happening. But Adolf had that, and he died early, unfortunately, at 70 or 71 of cancer, very, very unfortunately. And Lucas and his brothers inherited a lot of the things that their father had been building, and they'd been involved in the building. And Lucas, I think from the brothers, the other one takes a very quiet role, to give all credit where it's due. He has inherited a lot of his father's instincts and his father's attributes. And I think, without being vulgar or disrespectful, he's now worth into the billions of dollars and has moved domicile to Switzerland recently. But Lucas has the same, I believe, instinct and attributes of his father. And, he's taken that on, and nobody can afford to lose, 100 or 200 million or whatever it ends up being on the purchase price. But here's a man that's got money, and he's willing to take tremendous risk, but he's really betting himself on that bet, and his people, and no doubt in my mind, if he does a deal, he'll sit down with the heads, as I'm sure Kinross has, not to take anything away from them. They can afford to buy the best of the best, but Lucas will sit down one-on-one, and lo and behold, if anybody can crack that egg open, Lucas will. The same way that many years ago, Frank Juster, there was a bunch of older gentlemen were holding a very lot of valuable silver properties called Wheaton River out of Toronto. And everybody had gone to visit them to try and give them a story, and let me be the one to unlock these treasures. Let me be the one to take these properties and do something with them. And they turned down everybody, big companies, small companies. Frank personally was able to convince the owners of Wheaton to take those properties on. And because of his personality and his charisma and his risk-taking, he was able to build that into an amazing company. So what I'm trying to get at here, listeners, is that, yeah, there's black and white. We read the paper and you plug you look at the prices and the bid and the ask. In these deals, more often than not, as evidenced by the Peter Monks of the world, there is an individual who actually can, even in this day and age, can make a difference and actually personally negotiate these deals. Much as I'm sure Jim Patterson's doing today as we're talking on the air here. It's just nice to see it, that it's not all gone, messages and faceless things. It actually people and making discussions and sitting down. And I wish if Lucas does the deal, I wish him all the luck in the world. Charming, by the way, when he was living here, he would run at least an hour every lunch. I mean, very keep fit, and he deserves everything he gets, in my opinion.
Seamus, one vote and one vote only. September 18th, Scotland votes on whether they should be independent, and the latest numbers showed 97% of the Scottish population has registered to vote. They've never had numbers that high. And people are saying, look, I never voted before because I felt London just ran everything anyway, so why bother? This time, I have a choice in the future of my country, and the polls, they say the no side's leading. The next day they say the yes side is leading. In British Columbia, we know what polls mean. Former Prime Minister John Diefenbaker said it best, dogs know what polls are good for. The only one that counts is the one where you put a ballot in a ballot box.
Well, everybody in this part of the world, I know the show goes extensively around the globe because of the following, but everybody in this part of the world, we all know only firsthand exactly what polls can be in, and some heads have rolled because of that, of course, with the Angus poll people and everything else. But, what I think is it's a classic case of the bureaucrats down in the South and in England and Britain saying, oh, it's never going to happen. It's just a storm in a teacup, or take no notice, and blasé, and, let's, don't even worry about it kind of attitude. And you've got Sean Connery, waving the flag there for Scotland, and a few other big yay sayers, and, and it's not going to happen. Well, guess what? These people, and by the way, you talked about non-representation. I think I'm correct in saying that there was only one sitting Conservative member of Parliament that's Scottish. So they don't have any representation down there at the moment. So, whatever happens, if they win, lose, or draw, they're probably thinking, well, anything's better than nothing, what we've got right now. They are a very, very strong nation, and a lot of that, of course, is because of the oil wealth. And, at the moment, oil sort of goes up and down and sideways, but, the oil wealth being a tremendous driving horse and is over 15% of the revenue. I'm surprised it's not higher than that. They've perfected some other things, a little golden liquid that does rather well in a huge worldwide business called whiskey, and they do great with their Angus beef, and they do great with we were joking about it, but they do great with their golf courses and tourism, but and they're a hardy race. Don't kid yourself. If you think it gets rainy and cold and wet here in British Columbia, well, try Scotland most of the year other than a couple of months in the summer. And they're a hardened, wizzled race, and they're a tough race. And I think that if they were to separate, I think it would be bloody rough for them for the first while. There's no doubt in the Parliament, I think, I don't know that, I shouldn't really say that, but I think some people will possibly go out of their way to make it rougher for them than probably it should be. But they look around at other Europeans with similar populations, and they see how well they're doing. I think Scotland would do very well, and it would be treated as a Commonwealth country, of course. So I think that, these fearmongers and people saying it'll be awful, it'll be like the end of the world, and terrible, terrible, terrible. I have a feeling, as much as it would have me, I think it's lovely, and I think it's fabulous, and I've grown up with that and born with that. But, that Scotland has been part of our fabric and being British and all those things. As much as it would be awful in that regard from a gut-wrenching feeling, I don't think Scotland, I personally don't think it would do anywhere near. In fact, I think it possibly could do even better. And as we talked about, we've been joking off on air here, it's not a good example because it doesn't dwell to the same numbers and everything else, but you've got Norway there with its oil wealth. Of course, you've got the largest fund of its kind in the world, Heritage Fund, Oil Fund, and it equates. We were trying to work the numbers out that every man, woman, and child in Norway is worth about just over $2 million. So, but that's not possibly, those are numbers that I find fascinating, but it doesn't really relate to Scotland. It gives you an idea of things can go right with these small, well-run, tight. And there's another thing, by the way, that Scotland is known for being, very, very, very tight with their purse strings. The other thing I think you'd see happen, wouldn't happen right away, or it might. You never know. It might be the next day, knowing the way the world and the speed of communication. If they were to break, you'd see a country in Europe that would stand alongside them almost instantly, and call France. And if you go to Edinburgh, Scotland, where all the big banking square is there, I'm trying to think the name of the square, there's all these banks all around the whole square, similar to a Swiss kind of Zurich, Geneva situation. many, many, many banks in that square are France, because, of course, over the hundreds of years, they've all hated the English equally. So I think you'd see France very quickly come along. Same way that I think France was some interference there with the Quebec, and I was hearing the other day on that a lot of people from Quebec are going over to see how the vote goes. And by the way, September the 18th, Jim, is a very, very, very special day for another reason.
And that is?
My birthday.
Oh, congratulations, laddie, on your birthday.
Thank you, boy, thank you.
Martyn, is there a website people can go to find out more?
Elementandassociates.com is my website. We're still cleaning it up, working it up, but I think it's pretty accurate, and I do a lot of work with Jade Bell, which you're going to be seeing in the local papers here, because we did something the other night. But, and there's mentions about that on my website.
Thanks to our guests, Jack Crooks and Martyn Element. And thank you for listening. I'm Jim Goddard. We're back next week with more This Week in Money.
This Week in Money is a production of Howe Street Media Incorporated.